All right, and now I'd like to turn it over to Senior Program Specialist Shannon Studden from the National Rural Health Resource Center.
Thanks, Keisha. I am super excited to be here today. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. And it was actually really cool to see so many of you say you feel somewhat confident about building relationships, because we're going to take some time toward the end of our session today to have some breakout discussions and to share advice and thoughts with each other. And so based on those responses, I'm looking forward to just seeing some of the perspectives that you have to share with your peers. So this is our standard. We just need to remind everybody that the funding for this webinar comes through the Delta program funded by HRSA. It should look familiar to you. And just a quick reminder about what we are all about here at the center, that our focus is on sustaining and improving health in rural communities. So this is kind of where our focus is going to be today. So some of the questions that we'll answer together are things like what makes a person more or less influential, and what does it mean to be both influential and collaborative? So a lot of the time and energy that you spend as community champions is really around kind of building these collaborative relationships. So what does influence look like in those circumstances? And how might you strengthen those? So how might you be able to strengthen your ability to be influential and build stronger collaborative relationships with the folks that you work with? Quick agenda. So these are kind of all intermingled together. So we're going to spend some time talking about how are we going to define these and for our conversation today, and then get into what the research shows about people who are influential and what it means to be a collaborative leader. And then, as I mentioned, we'll spend about 20 minutes in smaller breakout groups with probably 5 to 6 people in each group. So I know I haven't met most of you, so just a quick introduction. Again, my name is Shannon Studden. I have been here at the center for about 2.5 years and joined the Delta team probably about 6 months ago. So when I came here, my primary focus was on working with rural health network leaders, and then I'm transitioning into working with the Delta program. So my background is in industrial and organizational psychology, which kind of takes concepts from the field of psychology and applies them to the workplace. So how do teams work together? How can we resolve conflict effectively? And a lot of my focus in my career has been around leadership development, around change management, and helping teams who are really struggling to connect with each other and build relationships. And one of my primary areas of interest has been in informal leadership. So how do people become influential, whether they have a formal title to go along with their role or not? But what is it about people that makes them influential? We hear a lot about, if you've got charisma, you may have more influence. Well, that really isn't what the research shows. So we'll talk a little bit about what we know about people who are particularly influential. And Keisha, can you just kind of, I have my eyes in too many places, and I can almost guarantee if something comes across in the chat box, I'll miss it. So can you just let me know if a question or a comment comes up?
I will, yep.
Thank you. So here's the definition of influence that we're just going to operate from today. There's a lot of different ways to define it, but for our conversation today, I would like to define it as the action or process of producing effects on other people's actions, behavior, or opinion. So something that we do without directly exercising formal authority over people, that influences them in a way to behave differently, do something differently, or think about something differently. So with that definition being influencing changes in people's behavior, actions, or opinions, we'll pull up this poll question, which is about how important a role does that kind of thing play in your day-to-day work as a community champion? So it's looking like the consensus is the majority on extremely important and another big group on somewhat important. So it looks like it definitely does play a role, which is good because we thought this might be an interesting topic for all of you for us to talk about and to share your experiences with each other today. So that's good. So if that's the case, if it's either somewhat or extremely important to your role, can I just ask you to type in the chat box, what kinds of things do you need to influence people about most often in your role as a community champion? You can be as vague or specific as you'd like to be, but what kinds of things do you spend energy and time thinking about your influence on? I'll give you a couple minutes to type. Does everybody know where the chat box is?
They should, Shannon.
Okay. If you don't, give us a holler. We can help you find it. So we've got getting on board with a project or event that would help with promote positive health, change, working together as a team can conquer anything. That's awesome. Karen says promoting hospital services. Constantly having to remind my hospital there's no hospital without the community and the patient. So kind of working on the opinion piece of that. So influencing the way that people are thinking about things. Thanks, Celine. Customer service, healthy living, a more positive perception of the hospital to external audiences. Yeah, I've heard about that a lot with my work with hospitals in the Delta program recently, and how important they are. So there's a lot about, what I see is a lot about influencing people's thinking, as well as some around kind of marshaling some energy around an idea. Leading by example, promoting hospital services, community engagement. Okay, so we're going to hang on, just put a pin in that. We're going to come back to this. Okay, we'll come back to that. Thanks for sharing. It's interesting to hear, just to kind of get our mind around what kinds of things we work to influence people on. Okay, can we close? I guess I can close my own chat box. All right, so we defined influence. Let's take a second and define collaboration. So, and in some of your comments in the chat box, it was about getting people to work together and to think of themselves as a group. So collaboration plays a key role in what you do, obviously, as a community champion. And so for today's conversation, we're just going to define collaboration as a purposeful relationship where all parties strategically choose to cooperate. And it sounds like some of your energy right now is being directed around that, getting people to choose to cooperate with each other in order to accomplish a shared outcome. So I know there's a lot of different ways to define both of these, but this is kind of what we're going to operate from today, if that works for everybody. So then the question becomes, let me get to the next slide. Then the question becomes, what does influence look like in a collaborative environment? And I'm going to share some ideas that come from Peter Senge, who is right now kind of one of the leading thought leaders on leadership. And he's been doing a lot of work around collaborative leadership and system leadership. And I'll tell more about that. Did somebody have a question?
I think I can hear you now. Can you hear me? This is Geneva.
I can hear you, Geneva. Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Okay, thank you.
No, I'm just glad it's working. This is great. Thank you. So the question is, what does it mean to be influential within this collaborative environment? And what we're learning is that leadership in a collaborative environment looks really different than kind of how we have traditionally thought about leadership, where someone kind of comes in and takes charge and it's kind of directing like a conductor in an orchestra, sort of directing everybody's activities. That the leader of today, whether they're in a formal leadership role or an informal leadership role, It's about social leadership. So really about being able to build strong relationships between yourself as the informal leader and all of the folks in you that you're partnering with, as well as building strong relationships within your group. So how do you kind of foster the building of those relationships among your group members as well as between you and other members of the group? And a lot of what you said sounded like this. So there's not a whole lot, I didn't see a whole lot of completely convincing people to do things, which we know doesn't usually work anyway. And if you've been a parent, you know how hard that is. But bringing people together to plan and to share information and to take action. So leading a group in a direction that they have mutually chosen to go. It's very complicated. It's a really complicated process. It's complicated enough when you've got the authority to direct people to do something, but it gets much more complicated when it becomes more about the social and kind of the squishier side of leadership. But that's really what it takes to do what all of you are doing. Before we get too far in the weeds on influence, I want to make some really clear distinctions. So when we're talking about influence and collaboration, it's really about having some very explicitly shared agendas rather than hidden agendas. So a lot of times I think about kind of the difference between influence and manipulation. So when we're talking about influence, we're talking about kind of putting everything on the table. Here's what I'm here to do. Here's what I would really like for you to do. And here's what I'm going to do to try to get you there. But we're going to keep having a two-way conversation and make sure that we're benefiting everybody. So it's not just, I want you to do this because it's the right thing to do, but I want to work together so that we can find ways to meet everybody's needs, whether it's individual needs or the needs of their organization. And behaving with authenticity and integrity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about trust, but kind of walking the talk and doing what you say you're going to do and doing also what you're asking other people to do. And making room for choice. This is not about trying to get sneaky and get people to do what we want them to do kind of, around the side. This is about being open and honest and building trust and building relationships and getting things done that way. So that's my disclaimer. We are not talking about manipulation today. We're talking about influence and collaboration. So this is just a quote that I just think is so good, and it helps me sometimes with my mindset when I'm really trying to get something done. And this is again from Peter Senge, and there's a reference to this particular article at the end of this slide deck that if this is something that interests you, take a peek at it. So this article is about system leaders. So the way that we think about what the definition of a system leader is a leader who's very collaborative, who works to build coalitions and really understands the overall system. And when I think about a community champion, I have not spent much time with all of you, but I feel like I'm getting a handle on the hard work that you're doing. And a lot of it is around that you are the people who really get the big picture. You really understand the overall system. And your charge is to try to bring the elements of that system together to make some significant change in your community. And so really you are all system leaders. And this article is all about what the research shows makes for a really, really effective system leader. And this quote I think is just really important. So what he says is that ineffective leaders try to make change happen, which is sometimes our temptation. Just push through and get it done. But what makes a really effective system leader is when we focus on more just creating the environment and creating the conditions that can produce change that then become self-sustaining. So it's not dependent on you kind of putting the hammer down and making things happen, but it's about creating the environment and building the relationship so that whether you're there or not, things just continue to progress. And here's what we know about kind of the big buckets of skills that people who are collaborative and influential, I kind of label them collaborative influencers, have. And these kind of start with really big, broad ideas and go down to the more tactical. So some of you may be more kind of like to think in more theory. Some of you might like to think more tactically and, okay, what do I actually need to do to make this happen? So we'll make each of you happy in some form as we go through these four. So let's talk just briefly about seeing the big picture. So leaders who really see the larger system help people broaden their view. So in a complex setting, people typically focus on the parts of the system that are in their own, kind of in their own vantage point. We talk a lot about silos. So when we're part of a complex system, we think about, what's in my immediate area of responsibility and what do I know? And when leaders can help people see the larger system, it really helps the group come to a shared understanding and a shared vision, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it helps, having the big view helps partners kind of develop solutions together that may not be obvious to any of them if they're just focusing on their piece. So helping people see the big picture. Also serving as kind of the global connector. So if you know what the big picture is and what the whole system looks like, the most effective system leaders can help pull those pieces together and get people talking to each other, and then facilitating the sharing of those diverse perspectives. And I know there were a lot of things covered in the Community Champion Boot Camp around the actual specific techniques for starting to bring diverse perspectives together and bringing diverse groups to having kind of a shared understanding and a consensus. So ensuring a shared vision, to really work together effectively and to influence people toward a vision, there has to be a common understanding of the vision, the big why. What are you really doing? What are you working toward? And this can be a formally stated vision or just an informal vision that everybody has a common understanding about. If there's a lack of clarity around what the group is trying to do, or different people have different interpretations of it, it's almost impossible to influence somebody in that direction. It's like you're playing pin the tail on the donkey, and the donkey's over here, but they are aimed over here with their blindfold. So getting everybody moving in the same direction is really important. And if you're thinking about this and you're thinking, well, I know we all have the same vision, but there are some people that you're really struggling to get on board, I would encourage you to take enough to kind of revisit it again and make sure that you really do have a shared understanding. Because sometimes when we're kind of immersed in something, we tend to assume other people have the same understanding of it that we do. And so if you can just check in on this kind of thing with the groups that you work with on a regular basis, you can make sure that everybody does have the shared understanding of that vision. So elements of this are, we have a clear understanding of it, and that everybody involved has contributed in some way to that vision. Because having influence also can be a two-way street. So when someone else has been able to influence where a group is trying to go, they're much more on board with that idea. And also know why they're there. So not only where are we going, and that I've made some contribution to it, but what's my role in it? What's my piece of this puzzle? And what do I need to do to make it happen? We also need to connect the vision to everybody's priorities, that kind of mutually beneficial arrangement. And we'll talk a little bit more about strategies for that in a minute. So again, if you're doing quick check-ins with your groups, you can just have conversations about them. So ways to connect it to their priorities are to ask questions like, what about what we're doing is exciting to you or meaningful to you? It can also help if you've run into a bunch of challenges and want to kind of get people's energy up again, to tap into what is it about what we're doing that really resonates with you. And how does the work we're doing overlap with your goals? What's that mutually beneficial relationship? And how do we define success? How will we know we're getting where we want to go? That's a really good question for you to be doing a check-in on how common everybody's understanding of the vision is. If people have very different definitions of success, that's a key that maybe it's time to revisit it and make sure that we're on the same page. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about trust. So we know that fostering trust is a critical capability of a collaborative leader. And we can divide trust into 4 kind of primary categories. There's a lot of different sources of trust, and a lot of different ways that we make decisions about how much we trust people. So this top layer is kind of really about character. So if somebody has integrity and I feel that I understand their intent and I think it's a positive intent, I'm more likely to trust them. So if they're honest, if they share credit across the group, if somebody admits when they don't know something, they have courage to take an unpopular stand, that all kind of plays into the integrity piece. And intent. So what are, if people's motives are good, the agenda is out on the table, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, we know that there's mutual benefit, that all tends to feed into that intent piece of trust. And then on the bottom row are about competence. So I make judgments about trust based on people's character and based on their competence. So what are their abilities, their talents, their skills? That feeds into capabilities. And what's their track record? What have they done in the past? That kind of gets at the result. So all four of those kind of fit together into the whole trust picture. And I can have trust in somebody's integrity, but not their capabilities. I can have trust in somebody's results, but not their intent. And it's really, all four of those need to exist for there really to be a strong trust relationship. This next slide, if I can get my mouse to cooperate, there we go, just shows some strategies for building trust in each of the categories. And I know these are small and we don't have a whole lot of time to go through this, but these all come from the book, The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey Jr. So if you know Stephen Covey, who has written the 7, oh my gosh, Habits of Highly Effective People, or something similar. So he's really well known. His son has been involved in a lot of the publications that Stephen Covey Sr. has put out. So this is the son who wrote Speed of Trust. It's a really good book. It's got really practical pieces of advice for building trust. But just hit a couple of highlights. So to build integrity, some of the keys are really to listen to others, to embrace new ideas and new perspectives. Intent, just really genuinely caring for others, which can be hard sometimes when there's a lot of conflict in the group, but to really be paying attention to what's important to people. Capabilities, just to keep your knowledge up, to make sure that you focus both on your technical skills, so what do you know about the field that you're working in, but also your emotional intelligence. So how do you handle yourself when things get tough, and how do you influence the people, the emotions of the people around you? There's a lot of really good strategies in this book for building trust in each of these areas. And then the last kind of really practical category, as we kind of work our way down those 4 categories, is about adapting your approach to individual differences. So if you really want to influence somebody, it's important to get to know them so that you know what's important to them, but also to know things about, how do they make decisions? How do they like to take in information? Some of us like to get it in written form. Some of us would prefer just to chat with somebody over the phone. Do they need a whole lot of information in order to make a decision? And you need to kind of methodically lay out your case and to build it step by step until you come to your conclusion? Or will you bore them to tears by the time you're halfway through your case? So really understanding how people take in information and make decisions can go a long way toward helping you be more influential and connect better with them. And then always just think about what's important to this person. What are their priorities? How do they spend their time? How are they evaluated in their job? And make sure that you're connecting what you're working to do with what's important to them. So here are just a couple of things that you can be thinking about as you're thinking about tailoring your approach to somebody. There's actually a whole process for this called Stakeholder Analysis, but this is just some pieces of the things you can either ask yourself, or you can actually sit down with the other person and say, I'm just really wanting to understand more about what's important to you and how we can better connect what we're trying to do with what your priorities are. So you can be asking some of these questions. What's important to him or her? How does what we want connect with, how does what I want connect with what he or she wants? And how do we need to make any modifications? Do we need to change the way that we're doing things, or change the things that we're doing in order to more fully connect with what's important to them? All right, we're going to go to breakout groups in just a minute here, but before we do that, does anybody have any questions or any comments on some of the things that we've talked about so far? Okay, then we're going to break into 3 breakout groups. Karen is going to just kind of facilitate the conversation in one, and Selena in another, and I will take a third. And these are the questions that we're going to go through. So these were in the reflection worksheet that was sent out with the calendar invite. If you thought about them beforehand, great. If you thought, just when I mentioned that, you went, oh shoot, I didn't even look at that. No sweat. We're just going to have a conversation. So these are the questions that we're going to talk about, and I think Keisha's going to put those in the chat box so we don't forget them.
Yes.
And then we'll go into breakout groups. Whew, okay, well, that time went by way too fast. So we just have a couple more minutes, but I'm just going to ask if you have a nugget. So did any nuggets of wisdom come out of those conversations? Anything that particularly you found particularly relevant, or a piece of advice that someone in your group had, or some insight that somebody had that you thought was particularly good? If you just add it to the chat box, and then we can share it with each other. How many of you ended up talking about the pandemic most of the time?
Yeah.
In our group, there was a lot of talk about just working to influence people to wear masks, and just how complicated that kind of a conversation is. Be flexible and open is one. Very different perspectives was another. It's very interesting just to listen to the conversation, and also thinking about schools and how to build relationships with schools and support them this fall, as as they're dealing with all of this uncertainty. It's a really interesting time. Lots of influence relationships to be working on right now. Does anybody have any? Oh, hold on, we got some more words of wisdom. So having to change approaches and filter what we're involved in internally to be better community champions. Absolutely. Just think about, where everybody was, 6 months ago. The pandemic still hadn't hit us full on yet. So yeah, just the difference between where we were focused and where our priorities were 6 months ago compared to now. And if somebody feels like you're overstepping, back away. That's an excellent piece of advice, which can be really hard when you're responsible for moving something forward, but knowing when backing away can be helpful. Sometimes it's one step back to take 2 steps forward later on. Thanks for sharing. So before we wrap up, are there any questions, any comments? Feel free to unmute yourself and share out loud, or type them in the chat box. This time went by way too fast. I feel like I could have this conversation for another hour. I don't know. You guys might not feel that way, but I do.
This is Jackie at DePaul. It was a really great session. It's going by kind of fast. I had expressed that desire to really want to delve into that even deeper. Because we do as champions deal with so many other issues, and to strengthen our collaboration within our group is so effective. It's just very important to us, that we not get into a bottleneck and be a hard squeeze trying to come out and then still accomplish our desired results, without changing the goals, that are set before us, and that we can effectively work through many different leadership styles. And, we all still come out as a group together, not having different agendas, in branching out into other areas, just sticking together as a team is so important.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. And I think it would be great to be able to continue this conversation and keep digging into this, because it is so much of what you do. And it sounds like there's a lot of experience and a lot of perspectives that can be shared just among this group, that you're all really, really skilled at this, and sharing with each other can be really valuable.
And I think this is Alyssa, and I think we'll have that opportunity to continue deeper diving in this. We're just starting to re-engage into our connecting with our communities through the program goals aspects. All the champions have been working with their hospitals and their communities in ways that made sense through the pandemic. And so we're starting to do some planning calls with some virtual events to help get to dive into some priority areas that the champions and their hospital teams have. So I think we will be able to have time to come back together, and in our next learning collaborative, how's it going? How is that behavior change with mask wearing going? What's working well, what's not, things like that. So I think that's definitely an option for us to continue this going forward.
Thanks, Alyssa. Are there any other questions or comments before we go?
Shannon, this is Karen. I just wanted to add, from our group, a lot of discussion didn't center around like our partners in the community, but it was a lot of times the leadership team at the hospital and ensuring that our champions are on the right page, the same page with those leaders. So they're kind of our united front in accomplishing the work in these communities. That was a common subject for us.
Thanks, Karen. Excellent point.
And I'll jump off of that for group 3 as well. We had a very similar conversation regarding other hospital staff and leadership. So from that, I'd just like to share a few quick announcements. If you have not already, please work with your CEO and other leadership team to identify a doodle poll date for your next TA planning meeting. A lot of you have selected those already, so I'll be sending out further reminders if your team has yet to select those dates. And then also our virtual summit is coming up, and it is actually September 15th and 16th, so don't mind the dates that are on the screen there. You should already have Outlook invites saved on your calendar for those dates. We should have more details, including more of an agenda for the summit to be sent out very soon. So stay tuned for that. Does our team have anything else to add?
Can we get the post poll?
Oh, thank you for that. Do this real quick here. It looks like we had a few people who had to leave early, so I believe that's everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share these results. Concerning my knowledge of strategies for strengthening collaborative relationships and building my influence with others. It looks like everyone is confident and somewhat confident. And these are definitely questions that we'll continue to address and look at and have with each other also. All right, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We had some really great discussions, and I'm hoping that they're discussions that we can continue to have with each other. If you have any further questions or would like to follow up with our team, don't hesitate to email or give us a call. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.